Hermione Granger and the Chamber of Secrets. Chapter 5. The Return to Hogwarts. The final 2 weeks until the start of the new school term were absolute torture. Hermione was desperate to return to Hogwarts and see all of her friends and positively ecstatic to learn from the great Gilderoy Lockhart. She was so glad Ginny had tipped her off to such an impressive wizard. Knowing that hundreds, if not thousands, of other witches across the world were collectively thinking about the same wizard at the same time was a comfort to Hermione. Finally, it was the night before the start of term. She had packed and repacked her trunk hundreds of times. Unfortunately, Hermione had to leave her favorite book, Hogwarts: A History, at home. It wouldn't fit in her trunk with all of the Lockhart books. She was able to justify it in her head, though, realizing she'd be able to make so many notes in the Lockhart book's margins as the school year progressed. I mean, how many times will we get a chance to learn from the source? Hermione said at dinner. Mary and Bert were used to her Gilderoy Lockhart rants by this time. They also knew every single word to the Les Miserables record of and Finnegan's exact route around the town. At their last dinner together, Mary pulled out all the stops with a huge fist full of Hermione's favorite foods. We are going to miss you so much, honey, said Mary. I'm going to miss you too, Mom, said Hermione, as she helped herself to another dinner roll. I promise I will write every week at very least. Good. We always love getting your letters, said Mary. She looked awkwardly over at Bert, who in turn took a deep breath. Hermione noticed the shift at once. What's wrong? She asked. Hermione, we need to ask you a question and reckon you might not want to answer it, Bert said. Hermione's heart started to beat out of her chest. What could they possibly want to ask her? Did she do something wrong? Did something happen that she couldn't go to Hogwarts? What do you mean? What's wrong? What happened? The words spilled out of Hermione's mouth like water from a tap. Bert took a deep breath. Both times we've been to Diagon Alley this summer, your mother and I had noticed a little animosity against you because you're a muggle, and we're just a bit concerned. I'm not a muggle, Hermione said quickly. I'm just muggle-born. Well, whatever it is, we've noticed, love, Mary said, both times at the bookshop. First it was that clerk when you were coughing, and then it was your school friend's dad the last time. Draco Malfoy is not my friend, Hermione spat. It doesn't matter if he is your friend or not, Bert said. What matters is that you're being singled out. It's really not that big of a deal, Dad, Hermione said. People like the Malfoys are just jerks. What they think doesn't matter. But it doesn't seem to be an isolated incident, Mary said stiffly. Hermione could feel her anxiety bubbling to the surface. She really had hoped her parents wouldn't have noticed the clerk's disdain. It was one thing for Hermione to notice it, but to have her parents notice it seemed to make it even worse. Hermione took a deep breath. Draco and his father are both Slytherin. And also, the Malfoys are one of the oldest wizarding families in the United Kingdom. They're extremely uptight and think they're better than everyone, especially people with muggle parents. They don't represent most people's views. Actually, a lot of wizarding families don't care. Hermione had to take a breath. She was rattling so fast she had forgotten to breathe. In the pause, Mary and Bert looked at each other worriedly. Still, it's not very comforting to know there could be people who don't like you just because you're our daughter, Bert said. It just makes us even more worried to send you away to an environment like that for months until the Christmas holidays. Hermione's throat tightened with anxiety. People don't like other people for all kinds of stupid reasons everywhere, not just in the wizarding world. Hermione replied. Besides, it doesn't happen often at all. Honestly, it was just bad luck that you happened to be there. Those were the only times I've ever been made feel uncomfortable for being a muggle. Hermione looked at her parents, who still had skeptical looks on their faces. I promise I'm telling the truth, she pleaded. Her eyes were filling with tears. If her parents wouldn't allow her to go back to Hogwarts, she didn't know what she'd do. Convincing them to let her go back to Hogwarts warranted her little white lie. Please, it will be fine. I'll be with Harry and Ron and Ginny. In fact, all of the Gryffindors are fine. It's just Draco and a few other Slytherins. After an eternal pause, Bert and Mary both sighed at the same time. Okay, as long as you're careful, Mary said. Hermione nodded enthusiastically. And stay away from that Draco boy. I just don't like him. I don't like him either, Hermione said with a small smile. She took a deep breath and tried to calm her thundering heart. Hermione, however, wasn't successful at quieting the pounding anxiety. Even as she lay down on her pillow for the last time before going away to school, Hermione's heart was seemingly running a marathon. Hearing her parents acknowledge that Hermione had been trying to ignore all summer, made the fear of being different all the more real. Not even thoughts of Gilderoy Lockhart could calm her this time. The only things that finally calmed her nerves enough to go to sleep were the accomplishments and transgressions of Emmerich the Evil, and even then her sleep was a restless one. Platform 9 3/4 was a bustle of excitement the following morning. Hermione and her parents arrived in London exceptionally early in the morning. She had insisted they leave an extra 2 hours early just in case the recently fixed station wagon wouldn't make the whole trip, and had a quaint breakfast in a small pub down the road from King's Cross Station. The massive golden facade of King's Cross Station towered over the car park with its grand arched windows glittering in the early morning sun. Hermione tried to lift her trunk out of the station wagon and nearly fell backward when she lost her grip. There was not an inch of space left in the trunk. Anything Hermione could remotely need for school was meticulously packed away, making the trunk too heavy for anyone in the Granger family to lift themselves. There was a lot of time to spare since they had arrived so early, so Hermione, Bert, and Mary took a leisurely walk to the main concourse to get a trolley for her trunk. Even if King's Cross Station didn't have the magical barrier to the Hogwarts Express, the building itself would still be magical. The towering glass ceilings and the decorative brick structures held a charm all their own. After retrieving Hermione's trunk, it took the three of them to pull it out of the boot. They walked together back through the station. As they neared the station between platforms 9 and 10, Hermione pointed to a dark wooden bench situated out of the flow of pedestrian traffic. That's where we sat this time last year, she exclaimed. Grangers hadn't known the secret way to get to platform 9 3/4. After trying unsuccessfully to figure out how to breach the barrier, the Grangers admitted defeat and sat on that very bench until Hermione spotted her friend Neville and his grandmother and realized he was a fellow Hogwarts student. This year, a small boy with mousy brown hair sat with presumably his parents and his little brother. He looked positively terrified as he absent-mindedly fidgeted with a camera almost as large as his head, but not as terrified as his parents looked. On the other hand, his little brother was having a field day, watching all of the people walk past. Hermione could definitely pick out some witches and wizards in the crowd, just by the way they dressed. And every time one of them walked past, the little brother would stare and smile. Hermione suspected the boy was a first-year student at Hogwarts, but because of the statute of secrecy, she couldn't outright ask him. She shared her thought process with her parents. See that boy over there? I think he's a student. Look how scared he is, she said, pointing him out with her eyes. And he keeps looking at the wall between platforms 9 and 10. Ah, said Mary, putting her hand on her chest. We should go and help them. We can't, Hermione said. The statute of secrecy. I don't know what to do, though. I want to help them. Well, why don't we just start talking about your school and see if they hear us? Bert said simply. I mean, that's what happened to us last year with your friend Neville and his grandmother. He didn't get into any trouble, did he? You're right, Hermione said. She smiled at the memory. Last year at this time, she and her parents watched with awe as Neville and his grandmother walked straight through the wall between platforms 9 and 10 to gain entrance to the magical platform 9 and 3/4. Hermione inched a bit closer to the family to make sure they'd be able to overhear her. Yes, of course, Mom, she said in a louder and more articulate voice than normally would be necessary. I promise to send an owl at least once a week. Hermione stole a glance at the little boy. He was staring straight at her. She continued, and if you don't want to send me a letter back by owl, I can ask the professors if there is a postal address for Hogwarts. Hermione made to say Hogwarts as loudly as she dared. That's great, love, Bert said, unnaturally loud and slow. Thank you for checking into that for us. We sure will miss you while you are away at Hogwarts. Right. What do you think? Should we venture to platform 9 3/4 so you can catch the Hogwarts Express to Hogwarts? The little boy was at the edge of his seat, watching every move the Grangers made. Hermione dramatically shook her head. Yes, let's go to platform 9 3/4. We can just wait there for the 11 o'clock train. Remember, when we go through the barrier, we have to be confident. Sometimes it helps to close your eyes. Mom, do you want to go first and then I can come back for Dad and the trolley? Sure, Mary said, shaking her head up and down enthusiastically. Hermione took her mother's hand, and with a quick glance over to the little boy, they walked straight towards the wall between platforms 9 and 10. As they were a few steps from the wall, Hermione couldn't help but shut her eyes. Even a year of magical education couldn't prepare Hermione to half walk, half run at full speed into a brick wall. The feeling of passing through a solid brick wall was extremely peculiar. Hermione could feel every single hair on her arm stand at attention, and a slight chill enveloped her lungs, which made her slightly gasp. There was a feeling similar to diving into a pool with the water rushing all around, filling her ears with a temporary roaring echo of sound. Then, as quickly as it had started, the feeling ceased, and Hermione found herself on the other side of the wall on platform 9 3/4. The platform wasn't nearly as crowded as the Muggle platforms they had just left behind, probably because the Hogwarts Express didn't depart King's Cross Station until 11, and it was only 8:30. The gleaming red engine of the Hogwarts Express towered over Hermione and Mary. Even though Hermione had already been on the massive train 4 times, it still caught her breath in her throat. It was a stunning array of machinery and innovation. Do you think they noticed us? Hermione asked Mary. We couldn't have been any more obvious, Mary said with a chuckle. It was like a bad theatrical performance. Good, said Hermione firmly. I know how scary it was my first year. They really need to be better about telling first-year muggles how to get to platform 9 3/4. That's for sure, Mary agreed. Not sure how they seem to constantly miss that little fact in the instructions. It's kind of an important addition, Hermione said. Okay, I'm going to go get that, and maybe they will follow me back. I hope so. Hermione squeezed her mother's hand, took a few steps backward, and then started jogging back towards the brick wall barrier with her eyes closed. The same bizarre feeling rushed over her as she landed back on the Muggle platform. She opened her eyes and immediately spotted her father. However, Bert was now standing right next to the confused family who had been watching her. The small boy and his brother both were looking at Hermione like she had 3 heads. She was quite certain they both had noticed her coming through the barrier. Her anxiety started bubbling to the surface. What if he wasn't going to Hogwarts and they just saw her come through the magical barrier? She'd be expelled for this for sure. Hermione, Bert called over to her. Come over here and meet the Creevies. This is Susan and John. Their sons Colin and Dennis. Colin is starting his first year at Hogwarts this year. Hermione sighed in relief. So nice to meet you, she said with a smile. She held out her hand to Colin. Congratulations on getting accepted to Hogwarts. I'm going into my second year and positively can't wait. Your last name isn't Granger, is it? Colin asked in a squeaky little voice as he shook her hand. Hermione was taken back with surprise. It is. How did you know? So that means you're friends with Harry Potter, Colin explained. Before Hermione knew what was happening, she was blinded by the flash of his camera. Professor Flitwick told me all about Harry Potter and how you helped him save everyone at the end of the year, he said excitedly. He said you were the smartest one in your year, and Harry Potter was lucky to have you as a friend. Hermione blushed bright red. Professor Flitwick was one of her favorite teachers at Hogwarts, and to hear him give her such a compliment was beyond flattering. I am quite smart, Hermione confirmed, but thank you so much for the compliment. I guess Professor Flitwick was your special messenger from Hogwarts? Professor McGonagall had been Hermione's special messenger. That's right, Colin said. He's a great professor. Charms is one of my favorite classes. We should probably go and join your mother, Hermione, Bert interrupted. Right, Hermione said. Are you all ready to go through? There's nothing to it. You just have to walk through and have confidence you won't just hit the wall. How on earth can you be confident of that when you're running at the thing? Asked Mr. Creevy in a gruff voice. Closing your eyes helps, Bert said with a hint of a smile. With one more nod to the Creevies, Hermione and Bert each grabbed the trolley's handle and took off for the wall at full speed. A second later, they found themselves on platform 9 3/4, headed towards where Mary was waiting for them. Took you long enough, she said. We were chatting with that family, said Hermione. The Creevies. They should be coming through soon. Hermione's prediction came to fruition just a minute later. Hermione found it interesting to watch Colin's face as he saw the Hogwarts Express for the first time. She could only assume the awe and wonder plastered all over his face had mirrored that of her own last year. The Grangers and Creevies chatted a bit more, but Colin was more interested in walking around platform 9 3/4 taking photos. However, he had Hermione promise to introduce him to Harry Potter as soon as Harry arrived. As the minutes and then the hours started to tick away, Hermione got more and more anxious. Harry and the Weasleys hadn't arrived yet. Ginny had mentioned in her last letter that the Weasleys' plan was to wake up early and fly the Ford Anglia to King's Cross by 10 o'clock, at the very latest. Hermione glanced at the clock. It was already 10:30, and there was no sign of the Weasleys or Harry. Neville, Parvati, and all of Hermione's other classmates had already arrived and stopped to say hello. With only 20 minutes until 11, Mary put her hand on Hermione's shoulder and said, We should probably get your trunk on the train. Maybe they're getting to Hogwarts another way. There's no real other way, Hermione said, deflated, and pushed the trolley behind her parents to the luggage car. The porter had no trouble lifting Hermione's heavy trunk with a flick of his wand, and in no time at all, Hermione and her parents were right back where they started, under the clock, with not a Weasley or a Potter in sight. The minute hand got closer and closer to the 11th hour. Hermione could feel her anxiety overflowing. Did I ever tell you that, according to Hogwarts history, the Hogwarts boats are enchanted to sail themselves? They are actually bewitched to only allow first-year students on them at the beginning of the year and seventh-year students on them at the end of the year. That way, they can be sure not to be hijacked by a random student at any other time and used for mischief. Bert and Mary knew that once Hermione started to quote facts from Hogwarts history, Hermione must be extremely nervous or anxious. Love, I'm sure they just got held up, Mary said. I'm sure there are other ways to Hogwarts that are better known to wizarding families. Maybe, Hermione sighed. Wasn't that Neville we saw just half an hour ago? Bert asked. You can sit with him on the way and ask. A flash of flaming red caught Hermione's eye before she could respond. It was Percy Weasley. Mr. Weasley and the twins quickly followed him. A few seconds later came Mrs. Weasley and Ginny, looking as harried as ever. True to their characters, Percy made a beeline directly to the train with only a half look over his shoulder to his parents. Must be getting on the prefect's car. All right soon, he called before jumping in. George and Fred were leisurely pushing their shared cart until Mrs. Weasley caught up with them. Hurry along, you two! Ginny will not be missing her first ride on the Hogwarts Express. Ginny looked terrified but set her jaw and started pushing her trolley towards the towering train. Bert, Mary, Mr. Weasley called as soon as he spotted them. So great to see you again. I see you're running a bit late too. Mugglebus is not running on time? We've been here for a bit, said Bert, trying to be polite. Right. Would have been here sooner, but Ginny forgot something, and the boys, of course, were taking their time. Hi, Ginny, Hermione exclaimed. I'm so glad to see you made it. Where are Ron and Harry? Ginny looked over her shoulder towards the barrier she had just magically emerged. They were right behind me and Mom, she said, squinting into the crowd. They should be coming through any second. All aboard! Came a magically enhanced yell from the conductor that rattled the ears of everyone on the platform. What resulted was absolute pandemonium. Every witch, wizard, and muggle flew into a panic to get to the train. Ginny and Hermione were pushed from behind by Mrs. Weasley. Hermione grabbed onto her mom's hand and dragged them with them. As they neared the train, Hermione dug in her heels and stopped cold. The rest of the crowd went around them. Well, I guess this is it, Hermione said with a smile she hoped wasn't too broad. Of course, she was so excited to go back to Hogwarts, but didn't want her parents to think she was happy to say goodbye. Right loads, and we'll see you at Christmas, yeah? Bert asked. I think so, Hermione said. Last year she had come home for the Christmas holiday and was absolutely miserable. It all depends on the classes and whatnot, I suppose. Quite right, Bert said. His stiff upper lip was coming out. He didn't want to get weepy, especially when Mary already looked misty-eyed. Study hard, and I can't wait to get your first letter, Mary said with a slight hitch to her voice. Hermione gave them both a tight hug and then jumped up onto the step. She scanned the dwindling crowd and spotted the Weasleys' red hair a few meters to her left. She pointed them out to her parents so they would have magical someone to get back through the barrier with. And then waved to Ginny so she'd know where she was. She couldn't, however, see Ron and Harry, but was sure they were out there somewhere. Hermione's parents walked towards the Weasleys as Ginny walked towards Hermione. She jumped onto the step with Hermione, and together they walked into the Hogwarts Express. The cars were packed with students. Hermione and Ginny fought their way towards the front of the train. No one seems to want to be in the cars closest to the prefect's car, so we'll probably be able to find some room there, Hermione explained as they fought their way through the sea of students. We can claim a compartment and then come back to look for your brother and Harry. We have to? Ginny asked. Ron's annoying and Harry makes me nervous. Hermione tried to hide her frown. She, of course, understood Ginny wouldn't want to hang out with her brother and her crush, but she had hoped it would magically be the four of them all year. It wasn't starting out so well for her plan. She tried not to let it bother her too much. Finally, at the front of the train, they found a compartment that was empty except for one very special boy. Neville! Hermione exclaimed, running at him to give him a second hug. They had already hugged once in the platform. Mind if we sit here? Of course not, Neville said, his pale skin blushing a soft pink color. Brilliant, Hermione said and took a seat. She patted the cushion next to her for Ginny to sit down. Neville, this is Ron's sister Ginny. She's a first year. Nice to meet you, Ginny said, sticking out her hand to Neville. Same, Neville said, shakily. How's Trevor? Hermione asked. Trevor was Neville's pet toad that had a petulance for escaping. He's great, said Neville, holding up a small lidded fishbowl. Gran got me this great little bowl for him to live at a muggle store. He hasn't escaped since. I think he likes it in there. He certainly looked like he does, Hermione agreed. Ginny and Neville chatted for a few minutes about frivolous things until Hermione couldn't take her anxiety any longer. Ginny, she said, interrupting Neville's story about how the last straw was when his grandmother found Trevor in her bed one night. Let's go see if we can find Harry and Ron. Ginny begrudgingly followed Hermione out of the compartment, promising Neville they'd return soon. They walked all the way to the back of the train and back up to their compartment without any sighting of Ron or Harry. George, Fred, and Percy hadn't seen the pair either. As they returned to the compartment with Neville, Hermione plopped down on the seat. She was angry. Honestly, I can't believe the nerve of those two. What do they think, they are too good for school? Well, they may just find themselves out of luck if they get to Hogwarts late. Half of me wishes they don't let them in. That will teach them. Hermione spat. The rest of the train ride was uneventful, with the exception of Hermione's periodical outbursts of disapproval at her best friend's absence. Ginny and Neville seemed to share a common nostalgia over wizarding fairy tales from their youth, which made Hermione smile and vow to look into the stories when she got to Hogwarts. There was an hour-long discussion on Gilderoy Lockhart as well. Neville wasn't as big of a fan as Hermione and Ginny were, but his grandmother had all of the books and he had read a bit. Soon, the prefects, including Percy, announced it was time to put their robes on. They were almost there. Hermione helped Ginny tie her generic Hogwarts tie. I'm quite certain by the end of the night, this time will be maroon and gold, Hermione said with a smile. She knew how nervous Ginny was about the sorting ceremony. She begged Hermione and Neville to tell her what it would entail. Her brothers, on the other hand, had tried to convince her it was a large test of skills to see what Hogwarts house she was sorted in. So you're telling me that all I have to do is sit on a stool and wear a bloody hat? Ginny asked incredulously. Yep, that's it, Neville said. Mind you, it's not to say it isn't nerve-wracking to sit up there in front of the whole school. You know, everyone's staring at you and all that. Ginny's cheeks flushed a deep scarlet. Though Hermione saw her eyes steel, she knew Ginny wasn't the type to let most things scare her. She was a true Gryffindor at heart, brave, loyal, and fierce. The rush to get off the Hogwarts Express as it pulled into Hogsmeade Station was almost as insane as the rush to get on it back in King's Cross. Hundreds of students in a sea of black robes streamed out of the doors to the platform. Hermione's ears perked up at a familiar voice. First years! First years over here! Come on, follow me! First years, follow me! Hagrid towered over the students with a bright yellow lantern. Ginny looked back at Hermione with a slightly nervous grin before joining the other first years in the push to Hagrid. There was a sudden bright white flash, temporarily pausing the bustling activity. Thinking someone had done magic, and perhaps that the someone would be Harry or Ron, Hermione scanned the crowd. However, the flash came from none other than Colin Creevey's camera. It flashed again as he took a second picture of Hagrid. "Oi!" Hagrid shouted. "Cut it out!" Hermione chuckled as she and Neville followed the rest of the Hogwarts students out of Hogsmeade Station. She wasn't sure where exactly they were going, as they had followed Hagrid to the boats during their first year. They walked along the path a few minutes and then came to a sudden stop. There, before them, were dozens of carriages, black in color with golden headlamps attached to the front. Each student mounted one of the horseless carriages, and they made their way towards the enormous castle. Hermione's hair on her arms was standing on end, though she wasn't cold in the least. Seeing the enormous castle emerge in the distance was an emotional sight to be had. Her fellow students seemed to be captivated by it as well. Most conversations hushed as the castle grew before them. Hermione jumped down from the carriage as soon as it stopped on the Hogwarts ground. She barely waited for Neville to jump down behind her before running to the front of the mass of students in front of them. She wanted to get into the castle as soon as she could. Her heart was aching to be inside. She was so close. All would be right in the world as soon as she was able to step foot within the hallowed halls of the ancient school. The magnificent oak doors to the school swung open and welcomed the students to the great hall. Directly in front of them was the broad marble grand staircase leading to the castle's 7 floors. To the left were the 4 giant hourglasses used to record the number of house points awarded or deducted for each of the 4 Hogwarts houses by their house color: maroon for Gryffindor, blue for Ravenclaw, yellow for Hufflepuff, and green for Slytherin. To the right were double doors leading to the Great Hall, destination for the sorting ceremony and the great feast. Hermione, Neville, and the rest of the students turned right and were transported into one of the most magical rooms Hermione would ever enter in her life. The Great Hall was, indeed, great, lit by thousands and thousands of candles floating in midair over 4 long tables. The room was breathtaking. However, the flickering amber lights didn't impede the enchanting ceiling, which mirrored the sky above the castle. The 4 tables, from left to right, Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin, extended along the room's length. The staff table was at the front, where the entire Hogwarts staff sat. Hermione smiled from ear to ear as she picked out all of her favorite professors, and some she hadn't had the pleasure of having in class yet. Gilderoy Lockhart sat tall and brave near the center, dressed in a stunning aquamarine robe. His mere presence made Hermione's breath catch in her throat. He seemed so regal, even compared to the man at the center on the throne-like chair, Albus Dumbledore, one of the most impressive wizards of all time and the headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Curiously, her least favorite professor, Severus Snape, was absent from the staff table. He was their potions teacher and also the head of house for Slytherin. It was no question he preferred Slytherin students to all other students. However, he harbored an even deeper contempt for Harry Potter and, by proxy, Hermione herself. Hermione forced herself to tear her eyes away from Professor Lockhart and the staff table to take in the rest of the room. There were small windows around the side of the hall and a large window behind the staff table. Illuminated by the window's light, a podium carved with an owl stood right in front of the head teacher's chair, and was there they made their announcements. The students filed into their house tables. Hermione found her spot toward the front of the Gryffindor table with Neville. Parvati, Lavender, and a few other girls were within talking distance as well. The murmur of all of the witches and wizards of Hogwarts manifested into an electric hum Hermione could feel in her bones. She was home. There seemed to be an interruption of the students streaming into the great hall. It was only about half full when the steady stream slowed to a trickle. Hermione barely noticed as she chatted with Parvati and caught up on what had happened since the last letter exchange. However, as the rest of the students finally made their way into the Great Hall, a few choice words and snippets of conversations caught Hermione's attention. Flying card, Muggleford, over the Hogwarts Express, flew right into Whomping Willow. Hermione's stomach lurched. A flying Muggle car? The only family who she knew to have a flying Muggle car was the Weasleys. And Harry and Ron would be the only ones stupid enough to fly to Hogwarts. She frantically scanned the Gryffindor table. Neither Ron nor Harry were there. Hermione shook her head. The boys were reckless, but surely couldn't be that stupid. Before she could dwell any more on it, a hush rippled over the students. Albus Dumbledore had taken his place at the golden podium carved with an owl between the staff and the student tables. His mere presence demanded a quick respect, and the students complied. Dumbledore smiled at the sea of black pointy hats spread before him. I present to you this year's first-year students, he said simply before sitting back down. The double doors opened again. A long line of scared-looking first-years entered, led by Professor McGonagall, who was carrying a stool on which sat an ancient wizard's hat. The hat was battered and all, its patched, frayed, and filthy. In order to speak and sing, a tear along the brim opened like a mouth. Behind Professor McGonagall and the Sorting Hat, Hermione spotted Colin Creevey towards the front of the line and Ginny towards the back. Even though one came from a Muggle family and the other came from a wizarding family, they both had the exact same astonished looks on their faces as they took in the grandness of the great hall. The students' hush seemed to intensify, if that was even possible, as all eyes snapped back to the Sorting Hat Professor McGonagall had placed in front of the owl podium and was slowly coming to life. Ladies and gentlemen, you know I'm nothing but genuine. Some of my sorting suggestions may have raised some questions, but my legitimacy has always been seen as nothing less than an inherent guarantee. See, being the sorter for the school and judging the first-year student poll, I revel in the chance for a clean slate for all students when sitting on this stool. For it is the student, not the parent, who is judged with a transparent set of very specific characteristics. The founders made remarkably apparent. Gryffindors are brave at heart, while Ravenclaw often outsmarts. Hufflepuff students are always just, and Slytherins are slow to trust, but loyal to a fault. But danger lurks around the corner for all of these first-year learners. In truth, all of the students at Hogwarts Fair are in danger from the mysterious air. The ones they call mud attract a monster, and our savior will be first labeled impostor. Only close your eyes to the untruths, nothing more, and fight so our Hogwarts can truly prosper. So go ahead, put me on your head. It doesn't matter who your parents are, but who you and what you fight for instead. The great hall erupted in applause. Hermione felt as though the Sorting Hat was talking directly to her. She could feel someone's eyes on her. From across the room, Draco Malfoy was scowling at her. Perhaps he had heard something that struck a chord in the Sorting Hat song as well. The sorting ceremony started. Each first year made their way up to the stool alphabetically as Professor McGonagall read their name. They looked so small. Hermione couldn't believe she had been that young only last year. Creevey, Colin, Professor McGonagall called out, and Hermione's eyes snapped up to the front. Colin was holding his camera like a soft toy. He looked so little and scared. She watched as Professor McGonagall lowered the frayed hat over his mousy hair. She could still hear the ringing sound of the sorting hat's voice inside her head, and imagined Colin was hearing the same. The sorting hat communicated through legilimency, a sort of mind reading with the wearer, listening to their thoughts and responding in kind. After a few moments, the hat's brim opened wide to say in a loud, powerful voice, Gryffindor! Colin popped up in surprise and nearly forgot to take the hat off. He ran over to join his fellow Gryffindors at the table. Hermione gave him a huge smile of welcome. The line of students continued, the sorting hat shouting one of the four houses' names for each student. Hermione continued to study the first year, since she really didn't have anything invested until the end of the line where Ginny Weasley stood. She noticed towards the middle of the line a hole in the line where a student should have been. A rather short girl with straggly waist length, dirty blonde, who was supposed to be in that spot. Instead, she was wandering over to the large picture windows. She moved slowly and deliberately, seemingly in awe for something unseen. Her arms were extended to reach out for something that Hermione couldn't see. Her dreamlike movements had caught the eye of a few other students and teachers as well. Her movement towards the front of the great hall at the staff table caught Hermione's eye. Professor Flitwick had jumped down off his seat and approached the wondering student. He led her back to the line gently to the tune of some snickers from the students. Hermione made sure to pay attention when the wondering student was close to the front of the line. Lovegood, Luna, was the name Professor McGonagall announced as the girl took her seat on the stool. Instead of immediately putting the hat on, she studied it carefully and seemed to pet its brim. Hermione thought she saw the hat bristle at the touch. Finally, Luna placed the hat upon her head. Hermione half expected the hat to shout out Hufflepuff without even so much as a pause. However, the hat stayed silent for quite a few moments before finally opening its brim mouth wide and shouting, Ravenclaw. Hermione had to admit to herself she was quite surprised at the designation, but soon forgot about it as the line dwindled. Finally, it was Ginny's turn. Hermione was on the edge of the bench. She seemed more nervous than Ginny, who stalked over to the stool and sat down with conviction. She looked so cool up there, Hermione thought to herself. Within seconds of putting the hat on her head, Gryffindor was heard, echoing through the great hall. Hermione joined her fellow lions in a loud cheer and slid down so Ginny could sit next to her as the newest Gryffindor. Congratulations, Ginny! Hermione exclaimed as she hugged her friend. Surprised you weren't in Slytherin, honestly, said Fred with a wink. But welcome to the good house, finished George. The best house, the friendly Jordan chimed in. Ginny grinned her thanks as the last few students took their turns getting sorted. As Ginny introduced herself to the people sitting around them, Hermione could have sworn she saw Harry and Ron peeking through the large double doors. Finally, she thought to herself. Her thoughts, however, were interrupted by a hush drifting over the room. Professor Dumbledore took his place at the podium once again. He opened his arms wide in welcome. Good evening, students. What a wonderful start to a new year at Hogwarts. As always, before we begin our banquet, I would like to say a few words. And here they are. That-I, Mimble, Slughog, Whiz. Thank you. He sat back down. Everybody clapped and cheered. Suddenly, the long tables were filled with a feast to the end of all feasts. Plates and platters materialized, overflowing with every food imaginable. Roast beef, roast chicken, pork chops, lamb chops, sausage, bacon, steak, joints, steak and kidney pie, boiled potatoes, roasted potatoes, mashed potatoes, chips, Yorkshire pudding, peas, carrots, gravy, ketchup, and peppermint humbugs. For dessert, there are blocks of assorted ice cream, apple pies, spotted dick, chocolate gateau, treacle tart, pumpkin tart, chocolate eclairs, jam donuts, trifle, strawberries, jelly, and rice pudding. Almost everyone was so busy eating their fill that no one noticed Professor Snape talking to the staff table and Professor McGonagall following him back out of the great hall at a breakneck pace. Hermione was too busy chatting with Ginny, Neville, and Parvati. Her heart and stomach were warm and full. The rumors of the flying cards started right back up again as the excitement of the feast wore off. The rest of the Gryffindors had noticed Harry and Ron's absence, so of course they immediately insisted it was them who had done it. Again, Hermione couldn't believe they would have been that reckless, and therefore tried to ignore the rumors the best she could. When everyone was full and sleepy, it was finally time to head to their dormitories. Hermione followed the rest of the Gryffindors up to the tower, led by Percy. Admittance to the tower was regulated by a portrait students lovingly referred to as the Fat Lady. She required a password for all to enter. This year's first password is Wattlebird, Percy said shortly to the large group. The password will change throughout the year, so make sure to take note. You will be stuck outside if you do not know the new password. Hermione glanced over at Neville, who always had a problem remembering the password, and gave him a reassuring smile. Last year, she had given him a journal to keep the passwords. He was furiously scribbling the password on an empty page. The portrait door swung open and the Gryffindor students shuffled in. Hermione, however, decided to stay back. She knew she had seen Ron and Harry looking in through the great hall doors, and knew she just had to wait for them. She had to know firsthand and before everyone else what exactly they were up to and why they hadn't gone to the feast. It just couldn't be because of the flying car. That would just be absurd. However, Hermione started to get a bit angry there in the silent corridor outside of the dormitory. The three friends had made plans to ride the Hogwarts Express and enjoy the feast together. She had been looking forward to this day for all the summer holidays, and Harry and Ron had ruined it all. Hermione wanted to be surrounded by the familiar tapestries and decor of the dormitory instead of the drafty corridor. Only a few minutes had passed since the last student had climbed through the portrait hall when she heard the unmistakable voice of Harry Potter coming up the stairs. Her anger had grown exponentially at this point, and she was close to fuming. She watched as the boys approached the Fat Lady. Password? Asked the Fat Lady. Hermione smirked at their growing distress at not knowing the password. Said Harry. Hermione couldn't help but stifle an irked giggle. Served them right to feel a bit out of sorts for making her feel the same all day. She gave them a few more moments to squirm before her anger and annoyance took over. Hermione rushed over to them. There you are. Where have you been? The most ridiculous rumors. Someone said you'd been expelled for crashing a flying car. Well, we haven't been expelled, Harry assured her. For some reason, his tone made her even more cross. You're not telling me you did fly here, said Hermione, sounding almost as severe as Professor McGonagall. Skip the lecture, said Ron impatiently, and tell us the new password. It's Wattlebird, said Hermione impatiently. But that's not the point. Her words were cut short, however, as the portrait of the Fat Lady swung open. There was a sudden storm of clapping. It looked as though the whole of Gryffindor House was still awake, packed into the circular common room, standing on the loop-sided tables and squashy armchairs, waiting for them to arrive. Arms reached through the portrait hole to pull Harry and Ron inside, leaving Hermione to scramble in after them. She could barely believe her eyes. Brilliant, yelled Lee Jordan. Inspired. What an entrance. Flying a car right into the Whomping Willow. People will be talking about that one for years. Good for you, said the fifth year. Cheers of agreement rose from the crowd. Fred and George pushed their way to the front of the crowd and said together, Why couldn't we come in the car, huh? Hermione saw Ron's embarrassed grin, and her anger skyrocketed. It was true. The smile on Ron's face proved it. They had flown with this car into the Whomping Willow. Hermione was just about to scream in anger when she noticed Percy getting ready to do the same thing from across the room. Harry must have seen him as well, as he nudged Ron in the ribs and nodded in Percy's direction. Ron's face fell immediately, which gave Hermione a small bit of satisfaction. Gotta go upstairs, a bit tired, Ron said, and the two of them started pushing their way towards the door to the other side of the room, which led to the spiral staircases to the dormitories. She wished, right then and there, that she had read up on more jinxes and hexes over the summer.